Real estate photography is a very large topic. It's a whole industry and a whole genre of photography. So I'm by no means going to get into every single detail that you may want, but I'm going to do my best to cover the bare bones basics, stuff to at least help you understand what's going on so that you can learn it for yourself. And maybe I'll make a part two once I realize all the things I didn't talk about in this one. So let's get started with the basics. Let's talk about the equipment first. I prefer a full frame camera. Why? Because two reasons. It gets a better image quality on the sensor and it has a wider field of view. So a full frame sensor will basically capture more scene per lens compared to a cropped sensor, because a cropped is cropped, right? It's seeing less of that light cone coming through through the lens. So full frame is a must for me. You're going to need a wide angle lens, not the kit lens that only goes to 18 millimeter, especially on a crop. It's going to be not great. So I suggest you buy and invest in a wide angle lens. Now I'm using the the golden oldie 16 to 35 2.8. And this is definitely not the new RF version, getting that soon, but the 16 to 35 does a really great job. I like 16 millimeters. Sometimes in bathrooms specifically, I wish I had a little bit more, maybe a 14 millimeter or even a 12 millimeter lens to really capture the size of small spaces, but 16 does pretty good in almost all spaces. Now, if you're going to be doing HDR bracketed photography, which is multiple photos in the same place, combining them together later in editing, we'll get to that in a minute. If you're doing that style of real estate photography, which I would consider industry standard, you're going to need a tripod. Now, on top of my tripod, I have something called a geared head. A geared head, as opposed to a ball head, which you have a tightening and loosening nut, and there's just a ball joint under your camera. This has three different worm gears that can adjust your camera, pitch, yaw, and whatever the other one is, XYZ rotations very precisely, because it's a worm gear. It's very slow and precise. So I'm use that because I can dial in the exact tilt and pitch and rotation, the perfect angle essentially to capture the architecture of the room. And we'll get to this later, but you always want to line up your vertical lines and keep them actually vertical in your photo. That is, again, industry standard, and your photos will look how they're supposed to look, or maybe how you imagine them looking once you get your angles correct. So back to the equipment, the geared head, you can get them anywhere between 150 up to maybe 1500. There's a wide range of hardware quality there. This one, I think, is 180. It's pretty cheap, and it's a Neewer brand, which is pretty well respected in the photography community. So again, a Neewer geared head, I'll put links down in the description down below if you can check those out. I did use a ball head previously, and yes, it worked. You can get the right angle. It just takes extra work, and it's not as fun. I like to dial in those three knobs to get everything perfect. And the ball, when you tighten the ball joint or the ball head, it wiggles a little bit, super annoying. So on my camera, I am going to be turning on my level, which is a little gyro on the camera that tells you if you're leaning left or right, or if you're leaning up or down, and where the perfectly straight angle is. So using that level is really good to get a starting point of where your camera needs to be. After that point, you need to dial in your angles with your geared head. Now, I am going to try to shoot at a level shot right around my abdomen area. This is where my camera usually stays. And it is shooting ideally straight along the horizon, right? It is looking straight up, or straight forward, sorry. It's looking straight ahead. That's what I'm trying to say. Straight ahead, not up, not down, because then your vertical lines are no longer vertical. They're slanted like this or that. We want them totally flat. I'll often use the edge of my frame to line up my, door frames or cabinet lines or window edges to make sure that, yes, the vertical lines in the actual house are vertical in camera, and as most accurately as I can, that's what I go for. Okay, the next thing to tackle with real estate photography is the editing in the software, right? I alluded to this earlier, but I mentioned HDR and brackets, and what are those things? Well, HDR simply stands for high dynamic range. So when you take a picture, a single photo with your cell phone or your professional camera, it has a certain dynamic range, which means it's a range of dynamics from darkest to lightest that it can capture while retaining detail. Have you ever had a photo of the sky as pure white, but there is clouds there, there is blue there, but in your photo, it's pure white. There's no detail. Well, that brightness of the sky, even though, yes, there is color and texture and clouds there, it is outside, or was outside of the range of your sensor with those given settings to capture. That's why it came out as pure white. Kind of like you hit a ceiling, there is detail up there, but your camera can only capture this high and this low. Similarly, if you can take a darker photo, there may be completely black areas in the darkest of the dark shadows in your photo. That's the same thing, but it's kind of the opposite. It's the bottom. You hit the floor. Below that, yes, there was detail. There's obviously dirt and things and shapes under there, but you can't see them because your camera can't capture that low with the settings that you have. Now, you can move your settings up and capture the sky, but now there's more shadows. Or if you move your settings down, your dynamic range down to the lower end, you'll capture the shadows really good, but the bright stuff is so blown out, it's even worse than before. So dynamic range is essentially that. The width or depth or breadth or whatever of how much light detail it can capture from darks to lights. Better cameras have better dynamic range. Newer entry-level cameras have much less dynamic range, and you'll find that when you're taking photos at challenging situations, like people outside at sunset, or if you're behind a house and you're in the shadow of the house, you got to pick what you want to expose, the house or the sky. You can't have both. However, you can break this rule with high dynamic range photography or HDR images. Now, what's going on here is we're taking a series of photos. Yes, our camera has limited to a certain set of stops of light capturing dynamic range. We're going to get a photo down here with nice shadows captured with detail and crisp details there. And then we're going to move up and get a kind of a mid-range photo with the mid-range values of brightness. And then we're going to shoot a photo that's up here where we capture the sky properly. The sky is actually blue. We can see the clouds. We can see through the windows outside. Now, other things are going to be black, right? And that silhouette effect. You got to pick and choose. You can't have your cake and eat it too when it comes to camera settings. But high dynamic range is a way to hack that system to break the rules and get the most out of your camera as possible. So we have the dark, the middle, and the bright photo, sometimes 5 photos, sometimes 7 photos of capturing that whole range. And then, software combines them together and we get a super image, right? A super dynamic, a high dynamic range photo. And it is not possible to capture that same photo with one camera. However, with those brackets, which is the dark, medium, bright, or dark, a little bit brighter, normal, brighter, brightest photo, those are brackets, right? Bracketed photos. That allows us to capture that full range of the dynamic range in the scene, in the real world. And our camera, even though it's limited, can gather that in bits and pieces. Aurora HDR is very popular. I personally bought and used Easy HDR for a while. And now I just kind of gone back to Lightroom. I actually didn't like how Lightroom did it, but now I do. I guess I wasn't doing it right. But because of the simplicity of me already having Lightroom, and I do use adjustment brushes and some other Lightroom tools there, I just do my HDR merging in Lightroom. Also, Photoshop can do it, but it's not as fun or as intuitive, in my opinion, as Lightroom. So I like to use Lightroom, but there are better and more equipped softwares to do the HDR merging for you. All right, let's get started with our first actual photo capture. Hopefully that information prior was helpful and informational to you, but let's do our best to actually shoot a room now, shall we? So I've got my camera set up here. I haven't done any twisting of the gears or knobs, haven't moved my tripod really at all. It feels a little low to me, but now that I'm looking at it, I kind of like this lower angle for this scene. So I'm gonna keep the height where it is, but it is leaning forwards. So I'm going to tilt it up by using my geared head, which is this joint, which means it's this knob. So as I turn this ever so slightly, there we go. You can see the angle already correcting itself. And I'm looking on the sides of my photos or sides of my scene to see things that are vertical, like the wall edges and windowsills and things like that. And as I turn left and right, yes, I can see how it lines up almost perfectly. Pretty good. If it doesn't, you may need to adjust the other levels here because your camera could be tilting side to side. So let's see if it is. Let's press the level button on my camera. Get my internal level, and it looks like it is not perfectly level. So let's turn this other knob, rotate it just a little bit. There we go. Now the lines are all green. The up and down level is green, and the side to side level is green. So that's double good. Now let's double check. Up and down, get that green. Yeah, there we go. Awesome. So theoretically, this should be the perfect angle. So let's set up a camera to get into bracketing photography mode. So I'm going to go to menu. I'm going to go over to camera settings. Let's go to page 2, press OK. And as I turn my wheel, suddenly I see this spread. Now, right now I have it set to 5 bracketed photos. So one's in the middle, which is 0. There's a -2 and -4. Then there's a +2 and +4. That's referring to stops of light or exposure, right? It's kind of how you measure exposure in cameras. So we're going to have a normal photo, a darker, a bright, and a brighter. All right, and I just press OK to set that. You can also change the setting of how many photos there are, whether it's 3 or 7, or even a normal one and the one below, or a normal one above, which is really cool. If you're traveling, just shooting really fast, you don't have time. Let's say you're in a helicopter, I don't know, hang gliding, and you want to take a bunch of photos and not worry about the exposure, you might want to try that. A normal one and a one below it, in case there's sky being blown out. So I'm ready to go. Now, one more thing is I'm going to turn on my 10-second timer. Why? Because when I press this button and it starts taking pictures, my hand coming off of there is going to cause some amount of vibration and shake, which is not good. So I'm going to go to my drive mode and go over to 2 seconds? No, 10 seconds, just to be safe. And let's focus on something that's the most important when your eye is drawn. Let's focus on the background because that's what the eye is going to be drawn to the most. And then I may actually just turn my autofocus off so it doesn't start shifting around and try to grab focus. Another thing I want to change is my settings, obviously. So let's get our settings dialed in. It's looking a little yellow and a little dark. So I'm going to go to my white balance and let's try daylight. Looks okay. I'm going through the different settings. They don't look particularly awesome. Tungsten is pretty close. So that means there's a lot of yellow light in here. So I'm going to go to the manual Kelvin setting, which is a way for you to dial in the exact color temperature of the lights in your scene so you can get the best, pure, truest white possible. So I'm going to dial this, I'm going to dial this down. 3800 is tungsten. That's where it was. But I want it to be a little bit warmer. And we're honestly dealing with mixed light, which is the bane of my existence as, well, when I do real estate photography, it's annoying. But you got sunlight, which is blue. You got tungsten light, which is yellow. And sometimes you got LEDs, which is in the middle. So you just got to deal with it. You can brush it and fix it later in Lightroom. All right, so I'm pretty happy with that. Although I'm going to brighten it up a little bit by changing my aperture to f2.8. And there we go. Okay, I can see it counting down. It's going from 10 seconds. Now I'm kind of regretting that. Maybe I should do a 2-second timer. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1, listen. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why was that last one slower? Because it was a long exposure. Let's see what they look like. We've got the super bright one, which is the last one that was taken, the long exposure one. And if we look at the settings, it is, 1/13 of a second. That's kind of long. I would never do that handheld. But here, it's on a tripod, totally sharp, no motion. All right. Look at the other ones. Going backwards, we have a nice bright one, a very dark one, a super dark one, and then the middle one. So we always want to start with a kind of an average exposure and let the camera do the plus and the minus for us. So the photo that's very bright has lots of detail in the shadows, and the photo that is very dark has details in the highlights. You see this weird little crisscross of dynamic range trickery. All right, another thing to consider in real estate photography or architectural photography in general is what angle are you going to shoot your scene from? Whether you're going to shoot it from a corner or a 45-degree angle, as I call it, like I did the living room scene. This kind of shows the directions going out that way, right, like a V. Or if you're going to shoot something straight on. I don't know if I'm using the correct term, but that's what I call it, which means straight on, like perpendicular to, I guess, a right angle in front of you. I like to shoot large beds like that. I like to shoot kitchen walls like that, like the oven and the stove and things like that, to show, the nice flatness of the angles and the right degree, 90-degree angles of all the cabinets and the countertops. But it's really up to your taste. I would probably avoid shooting anything in between straight on or 45. Because then your angles are getting like in that weird middle area and it just looks a little strange. So that's just my suggestion. Someone out there that has way more experience doing this might completely disagree with me, and that's okay. Tell me in the comments down below why I'm wrong, okay? So certain things, like I said, I'll shoot straight on. So I'm gonna set this scene up right here where I've got a kitchen table. You're going to, maybe before you start shooting, go through the whole house or have an assistant, make sure everything is perfect. Everything is OCD lined up, 90-degree angles where it needs to be. For example, this chair is not in the right place. It's driving me crazy. So there we go. I fixed those 2 chairs and already things look much better because when you're looking at photos like this for a long time, you're trying to decide if you're going to spend $500,000 or in this case, I think $1 million on a house, you need to make sure things look great. And I've already photographed this house, so I'm not going to go through all the extensive detail again because I've already did it. This is just for YouTube, so chill out. So here we go. I'm going to shoot this straight on. That chair is almost centered. Let's move it back just a little bit. There we go. Make sure that my brackets are set up. Yes, they are. And let's check my angle. So I am tilted down way too far. So let's adjust that with this knob. Oh, this way. I always do them backwards when I first start. There we go. All green lights on my screen, which means it is level this way and up and down. Let's check our exposure. I can lower my shutter speed. That way I can lower my ISO. You don't want your ISO to be higher than it needs to be because it's going to increase grain and noise. So I'm going to lower my shutter speed down to 60 because remember, we're on a tripod, so we can get away with a lot of stuff right now that we normally couldn't. And now I got my ISO down to 400. It was 1600 before in this shot. What was I thinking? Well, different lighting. This is actually darker over there, but this is good news. 400 ISO is better than 1600. So let's go ahead and change my timer to 2 seconds. Make sure autofocus is set. It is focusing on the chair. I don't want that. There we go. Boom, 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 boom. I shot our 5 pictures. Let's check them out. Wow, that's really bright. But look at the bottom. We have lots of detail on the floor. That's better. That's nice shot of the reflections and the ceiling. And that one's got the outside. See how we're combining the best of all the 5 different worlds, not both worlds, but all 5 worlds in this case, to make this super photo. And then, of course, our middle one, which we actually set the settings for with our manual exposure settings. So that is it for my intro. After I edit this, I know I'm going to be like, why didn't I include this? Why didn't I say that? Oh, yeah, what about Flash? Well, that's going to be a second video. Or if you want to really dive into this, maybe go pay for a professionally made course and stop listening to me blabber on about this. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned a few things. Please ask questions or correct me in the comments down below. I am a humble guy, and I know I don't know everything. That's one thing I do know.